Welcome to The Current by TreasureCoast.com, where we discuss interesting people, places, and happenings on Florida's Treasure Coast.
They've got jobs, they've got lives to live, and now they're trying to balance out, hey, who's to blame for this thing that I'm really upset with? Water's probably a good point in that.
Exactly. I would say, well, water is incredibly confusing on who controls what, and it has changed over the few years. But similarly with development, over the past decade or so, at least, slowly our state has eroded home rule in regards to local governments and their ability to control growth. And while I was in office in the period 2018, 2022, I constantly heard about bills that circulated in Tallahassee that I would call the preemptions of the Live Local Act or SB 180. The push has been there for a long time. Now they're passed, and not only now are they passed, we're seeing those actions. And it is frustrating to see that, because the people that created that law that we can't change at the local level, besides lobbying efforts or the judicial system, are frankly removed from their constituents in a way. I mean, they are here and they reside here in the districts, but they're not holding meetings here. And
Right.
In my mind, the best governance is the one closest to the people. But it is very frustrating, and it's part of it is local government's job to educate in a realistic manner the powers that local governments have. And I think what we need help from is the public to have honest, respectful conversations with local elected officials on their authority. And I feel if that messaging can get spread through the community of who is in control and able to do what, we might be able to see more change at the state level. Like, for example, Live Local Act, you get something 40%, I believe, workforce housing, and there's no local control, basically. And they can move through administratively, they can build on commercial. But in a way, my interpretation and others is that's a reaction that Tallahassee has done to, it may sound funny, but to scold local governments for not falling in line, disrespecting property rights. And the outcome, though, the problem is local neighborhoods are the ones that are hurt the most. And that's why part of my entire platform is let's come up with realistic solutions to what we can do. And that started with water quality, but it also pertains to growth. We have to be realistic about what a piece of property is, who owns it. And what I'd like to see is local governments kind of come up with clear examples of baselines, especially in the city of Stuart, of what the remaining properties are and what can be built there. Just flat out by their right, and local governments have no control over that. And then, of course, the other side is, what could be built there if they use the Live Local Act or others? But then we, as Martin County and City of Stuart, need to be proactive to preserve what makes us special, what keeps us different. Our 4-story height limit, I'd like to see that strengthened. And we're a leader in surrounding areas of public spaces, but growth is always going to happen in Florida. So let's be realistic about it, and let's stop playing defense and let's play a little offense. And that thought process evolved from what I learned as a commissioner, what I've seen at the state level, what many, many of us have seen in South Florida as a whole. My family's from Miami, multiple generations. I've seen it change. I was born and raised in Martin County, but I've seen Miami and Lauderdale all change. We all have. And the reality is,
Sure.
what is there now that's open space is owned as public land or conservation land. And that pressure only increases in certain areas of Florida. As Florida's a desirable place, as we are successful with our assets, with our tourist-based economy, with just a place that people want to come. So the pressure and the free market of people owning land and wanting to do something with the land they own will always increase. And so we take a step back and say, well, how do we keep us special? And at the end of the day, the realistic outcome is, all right, if we're going to manage growth, let's grow our conservation land. Because if we don't, it might be tomorrow, it might be another month, it might be a year from now. Property X can be sold multiple times in our capitalistic market, and someone has the right to build a certain baseline on it. No matter, especially in the city of Stuart, there's no ag land. Most of the properties in the city of Stuart are going to be single family residential, multifamily residential, commercial. There may be some others, but that's the vast majority. Commercial waterfront, it gets broken down a little bit from there, but they all have a baseline. Unless we have it as public land or conservation land. Then there is, the baseline is preserve the land. And having that system has been done before in Martin County for years. And we have so much public land to thank for that, from
Right.
All of our public beaches, Halpatioke Park, Indian Riverside Park, you could go on Haney Creek, Poppleton Creek. But understanding that people are going to come, growth is going to happen. So can we be proactive in offsetting that? And that's what led me to want to create Martin County Forever with a group of people. The job of elected officials realistically should be thinking long term, 50, 20-year cycles. And if you analyze the picture of making us special and preserving us at that level, that sky view, we have to take a step back and think a little more proactive of the application for development of a single parcel. At the couple commission meetings that it's brought forward, or the advisory board of the local planning agency. Let's look out in the future a little more and be proactive and try to put more land in conservation. And to do that, we need a funding source. And that's Martin County Forever created a funding source for the county and has been a tremendous success. That funding source lasts for 10 years. I want to do my best to make sure it's renewed. And I did my best to make sure it passed over the past 3 or 4 years and write the language to make sure that I was speaking on behalf of it, I have my heart behind it. That I believe that the funding would be used to acquire land that's there for generational change. And it has been, I would say, a tremendous success. We have 3,000 more acres of land in Martin County that are undeveloped, that will not be developed, including an acre on Hutchinson Island, just north of House of Refuge, going from that's now more public beach. And that's year 1.5. We have 8.5 more years to go. Our target area was 45,000 acres, almost 46,000 acres. We knew we weren't going to hit the entire target area. But if a little over a year in, we're at 3,000 acres, just imagine if we hit in 10 years 30,000 acres.
Right.
That's significant. I mean, and that takes the land and preserves it forever. And I want to compare that to people riled up trying to stop, one project that has a baseline. Perhaps to give an example, right downtown Stuart on Colorado, where the hotel is being built, adjacent to Fraser Creek. It's a Hilton hotel going up, and the land is cleared. That came before me when I was a commissioner. And that was a battle, a micro discussion. Whereas what I just described prior is that 2,000-foot elevation view. And at the time, there was no funding source. There was no mechanism. But successfully at that point, we argued against the project, and the property, I believe, changed ownership. And the owner at the time did not move forward with his project. So it stayed for a few more years. We stopped it at the micro level. Now currently, within the past year or two, and the commission now, we all see it's plowed and built, and there's going to be a hotel there. So at the end outcome, I would not deem that as a success if the goal is conservation land. And I think that would have been a perfect property to use with the funding source created by Martin County Forever, which generates income to the city of Stuart. The underlying intent of that funding source that the taxpayers saw, and the messaging to the taxpayers, was conservation land to protect water quality. And that property is right on a tributary, right on Fraser Creek. That one's done, but there are many others around the city of Stuart that could be acquired. And Martin County Forever is working forward on that. I'd like to bring this same model to the city of Stuart. I already helped create the funding source. What I want to see is a advisory committee of city residents go down the list of the remaining properties in the city of Stuart and make some recommendations and be proactive when it comes to proactive and realistic. Knowing the authority of the city compared to the authority of the state and their stripping of home rule over the past few years. So how can we counter that? And City of Stuart gets $2.7 million a year from the same initiative. That's 10 years, that's $27 million. And I believe if we are successful with it, hopefully, if the city and county are successful in doing what the taxpayers voted on, we can get it renewed and keep going. Being realistic that people are going to keep coming here. Local governments cannot stop that. But to preserve what makes us special, we can keep growing our conservation land at the same time. And we get a lot more done by working together and doing that is the plan.
Yeah. Merritt, can I ask you a question about the Martin Forever? Because that's an interesting. A lot of times I've heard of Martin Forever. It seems like a lot of the talk is, I think there was a lot of, uh, you know, blue fields, stuff outside of the um, urban services boundary. Um, and so it's interesting to hear spots like maybe within city limits or maybe spots that would make for a good park. I'm interested to hear, like, from your point of view, because obviously you represented us, you represented the city of Stuart uh, a couple cycles ago, and so you're running again. I'm interested to hear whether it's Martin Forever, whether it's the water, whether it's thinking of some of these developmental patterns that you're talking about. Is there something that stood out that's different from when you represented the city that made you more incentivized to run this time? Or is it kind of just you want to continue building off what you felt you had created and kind of started the momentum before?
I guess you'd have to break that down. It seems like a lot of questions, but let me clarify Martin County Forever and the funding sources to start with,
Yeah.
because that wasn't there. And me being a commissioner for 4 years, I saw a lack of assistance to try and grow our conservation land. Growing the conservation land has always been a goal, but local governments can't do that on their own. If the people come together and work with them, they can. Now, the funding and the hard-lined law and rule that the voters passed binds the half-cent sales tax for 10 years to Martin County. And Martin County generates roughly, the numbers do change, but roughly say 22 million a year. The ordinance that we wrote binds all that money to be spent, to summarize, conservation land to protect our water quality. And the areas that Martin County can spend the money are limited. In River Lagoon South, the Loxalucy Headwaters region,
Yeah.
Palmar, and the Blue Ways. Now, the Blue Ways is not a specific region with, more lines drawn on a map. It's undeveloped properties along the water.
Right.
Because the way our state law works with sales tax, every municipality in Martin County gets a percentage from the state, not of that 22 million a year, but from the state allocated for that sales tax. And what I did and the co-founder Jim Snedeker did was we sought the municipalities at the time and just asked for, rough agreements. Basically, we knew we couldn't. The municipalities are not bound by the same ordinance that the county proposed to the taxpayers with that funding, but we sought agreements that they would use their allocation of funding with that intent that the taxpayers approved. Conservation land for water quality. But the city of Stuart, so it being the largest population, gets $2.7 million a year roughly. They, don't have to spend that funding in Palmar, Loxalucy, or anything. I'd love to see it spent in properties that match the Blue Ways program, which, frankly, the property we were talking about where the hotel is on Fraser Creek would have fallen under that category. They don't have to do any of this, but they can, and the intent would be conservation for water quality or water quality projects. Now, I would push as a commissioner to leave that up to an advisory group of city residents. But there are others. I was in a neighborhood the other day, and there's a vacant land. The surrounding neighbors, this is on Poppleton Creek, had flooding issues at times, and there's a vacant property between a few houses that is adjacent to the headwaters in Poppleton Creek. That could be another potential where You direct the water there and plant native plants, slow the flow into the creek, and ease the flooding issues, and have sort of a passive park. There's many examples of that. The issue when I was in office, the top issues that I ran on, I wanted term limits, and I wanted to advocate for our water quality. I also wanted to stop Brightline the first year I was in office, and realized in a humbling way how powerful Brightline was and how little authority local governments had. I was successful on term limits. The city of Stuart now has term limits of 12 years, and that's how I learned about referendums, which led into helping spearhead the referendum for Martin County Forever. And I worked tremendously hard on water quality in the St. Lucie River. And I'd like to continue that on behalf of the city of Stuart. Over the next few years, there's going to be a new Lake Okeechobee management plan coming up to factor in the EAA reservoir. Yeah. And Stuart needs to be, a strong seat at that table, advocating to increase the gains we made from, prior LORS 2008 to LOSUM currently. We gained about 3 feet of relief on the lake from discharges. But that's it's a win in a battle. The winning the war with dealing with Lake Okeechobee is no regulatory discharges ever. And some might say we may never win that war, but let's keep fighting. Let's keep pushing till we get there. So yeah, I mean, did that mostly answer the questions?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that touches on it. I mean, I think, yeah, I know. I threw a bunch at you because I was listening to you and I'm writing some stuff down, just trying to because it is interesting to keep in mind. I think for a lot of people, I think water quality, and we were talking about this before, but water quality is a good example of, I think people don't really know. They know. I think it was 2015 or so was when we had the water quality really got on everybody's radar here in a really big way. And, a lot of times people, they know when something's wrong. They don't always know who's in charge, who's to blame, what can you do? And, you were now to a point where recently they had mentioned that Lake Okeechobee was, I don't know, it was like 10 feet. It was one of its lowest levels in a long time. And so, I mean, what role does the city play? Is it more of like an avocational role? Is it working with the city? Is it talking to people from the state? How does a city commissioner advocate for water quality in the city?
Well, this is a topic I love. So that spawned my initial run. As people may or may not know, I was a fishing guide. I studied environmental biology. I was on the water frequently, and conversations, being out on the water with different people, that, combined with the history of, the St. Lucie Canal being dug to drain Lake Okeechobee, and the misdirection that we as South Floridians did with, Mother Nature of South Florida and screwing up how the system works, is what run that. And of course, so in 20 and 28, the city of Stuart had toxic algae blooms, clearly toxic, health damaging algae blooms. Dogs died, people got sick. It was real and extremely dangerous. Prior to that, in 98, and so, we didn't have the toxic algae blooms, but we had massive fish kills. Fish with legions on them popping up throughout the South Fork, North Fork. And those are just the highlighted years. But in a way, that problem has always been there. It's built up over time from damaging the immune system of the St. Lucie estuary, our seagrass and oyster beds, to the point where the immune system had died so much and the lake had gotten so damaged as well that you literally have toxic water being dumped on us. Now, and this is something that has been known, and there has been advocacy. But for a year to almost 2 years, I sat in a commission meetings. I was on the local planning agency from 2016. I ran and got elected in 2018. One might say a lot could be advocacy, but it went well beyond advocacy. I sat in the room. Well, first, we just passed a resolution demanding 0 Lake Okeechobee discharges. Then I started analyzing the prior management model with Lake Okeechobee. And LOR's 2008, not only could they dump on us at 13.5 feet, 200 cubic feet per second out of the lake was deemed beneficial to our estuary. We're talking about a management plan that said that was beneficial to us, of water coming down a 26-mile man-made canal into our estuary, and that's beneficial. We don't need that water at all. So that was the first step, is removing that from a management plan. And then doing as much as possible to advocate that we don't want any discharges, and getting on paper that they are all bad. And so the structure of how that management plan came about was the Army Corps of Engineers was running it. They are not in charge of water quality. They're in charge of flood protection and navigation and recreation and irrigation. And the state then is further in charge of irrigation. But the state is in charge, the South Florida Water Management District and the DEP, of water quality. But because of those algae blooms being so toxic, the Army Corps of Engineers started, acknowledging the water quality issues. And I believe because the advocacy from City of Stuart and Martin County and many other nonprofits in the area, Friends of the Everglades, River Coalition, River Keepers, all speaking up and being at those, that led to the successes of reduced regulatory discharge from the lake.
I want to make sure before we wrap up, is there anything else that you think would be worth covering, or that you'd like to say, whether it's about something that's important to you, Stuart, your campaign, you personally, that you think people should know or that you want to get out there?
I mean, the main messaging is I'm heavily involved in water quality, and I'm heavily involved in we need, as a city and as a county, our elected officials need to be transparent with the public of what authorities they have and how we can make progress by working with the public and provide solutions. And I think one of the best ways, I'd like to create a little more detail, understanding that the city is close to almost built out. There's not that much remaining parcels that are undeveloped.
Yeah.
So it's not too much of an ask to have our staff put them all out there. But also, as we put them out there, we're going to rank them with a committee as far as, ones that we could seek to put in conservation land, but also put out there examples of what can be built by right on those parcels. Because I see a lack in messaging about that. And I hear that, I've heard that throughout the few years I've been doing this, that there's this thought that every undeveloped parcel is controlled by the city of Stuart, or if it's in the county, controlled by the county. And we need to message what The landowner controls that parcel, and there are limitations of what can be done on it. But if the city is better at putting out what those rights are as it stands, I think we'd all be better, and we could kind of stop a lot of the attacks when something happens, and maybe move forward and bring the community together to working on goals. And it was that same thought process that led to Martin County Forever, or being proactive about getting conservation land. Let's focus on bringing our community together. Every single one I've talked to wants to keep Martin County special. That shouldn't be the fight. How do we get there?
Right.
And we do not get there by attacking each other and dividing our community. We get there by bringing us together and moving forward with plans to do that. And that's what my campaign has been about this entire time. And I want to just say another important thing, that talking on bringing people together. I'm constantly attacked on social media because the Chamber of Commerce endorsed me. And when someone endorses a candidate, generally they're doing that. They're trying to talk them up and spread word. In my history, the prior times I ran for city commission, I was never endorsed by the Chamber of Commerce. And I think once I was endorsed by the Board of Realtors, and other times not. But when I lobbied and thought about how to do Martin County Forever, the entire thought process was, how do we bring this whole community together? And I went to environmental groups, Audubon, Rivers Coalition, Friends of the Everglades, Vote Water, and got their support. But then the mission was, all right, let's go to what groups are now just constantly attacking and saying these are bad people. But I went to every group in our community, laid out the plan, and said, let's be proactive on a solution. And I'm talking about the taxpayers, Martin County Taxpayers Association, the Board of Realtors, and all the different chambers of commerce. And you know what? Those were the ones that supported it as well. All these groups that are, being attacked or that if we interact with, we are bad people. And these people live in the community, and they all supported the same initiative. And there was a unity in making this push. The problem is the main groups that are attacking everyone on Facebook, they were nowhere to be found in supporting the Martin County Initiative. And they still throw attacks about it. And if we do not do something different than the counties to the south of us, history has proven that. We cannot just attack each other and attack our local governments without coming up with a solution and working together as a city and county with a common goal. And I by the numbers that all of the tax, 64%, that is almost unheard of when you're asking people to tax themselves. Everyone agrees, let's do it. But there's still constant attacks on social media about it. And we need to move forward as a community on working towards solutions, realistic solutions.
Yeah, I think that those are good points. I think that that's a good, I think you're right in the sense that I think for 80-90% of it, most people will kind of agree on what needs to be done, or most people, they say things like they want to protect the charm of Stuart. We want clean water. I mean, a lot of these things, I think it is interesting because that you're right. And that should not be where the divide is, or that should not be where, people, that's not the disagreement really.
Exactly. And yet that's what you see on social. Oh, well, he was endorsed by the Chamber of Commerce. Well, you know what? I met a lot of those people, and no, I wasn't endorsed ever in any other prior time, except with Martin County Fair, because they saw the plan and they supported it too. So they gave me the opportunity to give educational talks around the county at different businesses, at different, luncheons or whatever, because they supported it. And just like they did, Rivers Coalition did, Florida Oceanographic did, others did. And it's how do we get there? Let's move past the everyone is a bad person. The business community wants to preserve our best assets too, wants to keep us the same charm that Martin County has. We want local businesses to succeed here, and they will succeed more if our water quality is clean, if we have more public beach access. Everyone sees that. But we have to understand and work together, knowing the bounds of local governments, knowing the restrictions that state of that Tallahassee is putting on us, and support ways to get there realistically. And we don't do that by dividing and attacking each other on it and saying our neighbors are bad people.
Right.
That's not how it's there.
Yeah. Well, Merritt, I appreciate you being on. I think we, especially with the technical difficulties, we went a little over, but I mean, it was really interesting to have this conversation with you and go a little bit more in depth about some of the things like the water, like Okeechobee, like conservation, like Martin Forever, and kind of how that ties into your campaign and your views. I think a lot of times it can, people and it just, they talk about these hot topic items and not as much really from the real roots of what someone believes and what's important to them. And so I appreciate you being on and joining me and having this conversation.
Josh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And anyone watching this, sorry for any of the technical glitches. Maybe you can do what you can to.
Yeah, they'll be edited
out,
out, so they don't have to deal with the stress that we had to. Yeah.
Good. And I'd be happy to give, merrittforstuart.com is my website, and people can call me. One of the things that makes our small town charming is face-to-face conversations.
Yeah.
So have people give me a call. My cell phone number is 772-233-8406, and I can meet them for coffee or something downtown, and we can discuss things. Anyway, I appreciate it, Josh.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
That's a wrap for this episode of The Current by treasurecoast.com. If you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Follow us on social media or visit treasurecoast.com for local events, tips, and news. Have a guest or topic you'd love to hear on the show? Let us know at treasurecoast.com. Until next time, keep riding the current and enjoying everything the Treasure Coast has to offer. See you soon.